Hello, and welcome back to episode 6 of Skeptics and Seekers, Failure of the Fall. I'm one of your hosts, David Johnson, and I'm joined by my friend...
Yep, I'm Dale, and I'm representing the Christian or Seeker side.
And today, as mentioned, we'll be talking about the topic Failure of the Fall. I just want to thank everyone for returning and all of the comments left. We'll be reading out a little bit of that. I also want to mention that we have people who follow the blog, and so they get each blog post or a notification of the blog post in their mail. You can also follow it with an RSS reader, which is how I follow it myself. And also lots of people have just made likes for the blog, which you can do, and that makes us feel good. And we like you too. We'll be reading out some of that a little bit later. Today we're talking about the fall. The fall is an important Christian doctrine. I would say it's an essential Christian doctrine. It's one of those doctrines where I can point back to in my own life and say, this is one of the reasons why I'm not a Christian. So not everything that we talk about will be as directly related to why I am an unbeliever and why Dale is a believer, but this is one of those topics where we can point to, and I would say it has a very direct effect on my ability to believe. And so I'm just going to jump right into it, and I'm going to try to make my case for why the fall fails as a doctrine. So one of the things that I can imagine Dale would want to do is say, well, look, you make some interesting points about the fall, but the fall doesn't really matter. It's not an essential doctrine. You don't have to believe in the fall. And so I want to start with the case. By the way, you can know exactly what Dale would say about this by reading the blog. It's at skepticsandseekers.wordpress.com. So if you haven't done so already, take a look at the blog post. And this is a conversation that follows the blog. So when I talk about things that Dale might say, chances are it's something he's already said in print. So I actually believe that the fall is a necessary doctrine. So I want to start by making that case that you can't have Christianity without the fall. The fall is the basis of what I consider the bad news. You can't have the good news without the bad news. And the bad news, as I've described it, is in 3 parts. There's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with the world, and there's hell to pay if it doesn't get fixed. Well, the fall kind of addresses all 3 of those things. There's something wrong with you because you're a sinner. There's something wrong with the world because it is now covered by this thing called sin. And there's hell to pay in that there are consequences as a result of this sin. We get all 3 of those things from the doctrine of the fall. And you might even describe the fall in terms of something called original sin, which is to say we have sin in the world and everybody is a victim of sin, whether or not they actually commit a sin. They're still a victim of sin because Adam, the federal head of humanity, introduced sin into the world, and so we have a kind of a sin environment. We're surrounded by a sin matrix, a sin miasma, if you will, and there's simply no way around that. And so original sin means that sin came into the world from the original humans. So why is that a critical doctrine? I just want to read a few passages. This is Romans 5. I'm going to read bits and pieces, not the whole thing, but bits and pieces of verse 12, 14, 17, 18, and 19. And the reason I'm reading all of this is to show that Paul makes this case 5 or 6 times in this chapter, in this cluster of verses, says practically the same thing. So here we go. So then, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, yet death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who did not sin in the same way, that Adam, who is the type of the coming one. For if by the transgressions of one man death reigned through the one, how much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ? Consequently, just as condemnation for all people comes through one transgression, so too through the one righteous act came righteousness leading to the life for all people. And then finally, for just as through the disobedience of the one man, many were made sinners, also through the obedience of one man, many will be made righteous. This is Romans chapter 5, verse 12, 14, 17, 18, and 19. It's just repetition after repetition after repetition. And so if you can say that there is one clear doctrine in the Bible, this has to be it. I can't imagine that Paul cared about making us understand anything more than he cared about making us understand this. And it's essential because he ties the literal sin of the literal Adam to the literal salvation of the literal Christ. And so if you say, well, one of them is not real, then there's room to say, well, neither one of them is real. It doesn't make sense to have the second part without the first part. The other reason you have to say, I believe, that this is a literal, that is important to Christianity is because Jesus believed in the literal Adam. So from Matthew 19, we get the passage where Jesus is talking about marriage. Some Pharisees came to him to test him and ask if it is lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason. And Jesus said, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made male and female? And he goes on this way. But he ties this very moral issue to the literal creation of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. We don't get that teaching unless there's a literal Adam. And so and if there is no literal Adam, then I think that we can say that Jesus is wrong here. Now, some people might be willing to say, well, Jesus was wrong. He made a mistake. But I would say that if Jesus is wrong, he's not God. If he's wrong, he's just some guy who can be wrong about stuff. So I think that you have to take it seriously. But I also think that it is impossible to view the fall in terms of evolution. It's just not possible for both to be true. So if you're an old Earth creationist or a theistic creationist, or whatever term you use to include evolution in billions of years into your theology, you can't have the fall. So my case for that is that there was a special creation of Adam and Eve. So part of the foundational story is that God created different things at different times in different ways. So we got the sun and the moon and the stars. We got the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. We got the flora and the fauna, and we got the lower animals that walk on the earth, and then we got humans. And the humans were not an evolutionary process of that. The humans in the story are a separate creation where God creates a different clump of dirt and breathes into it the breath of life. And so it's not some ancestor of something else. So if you take the story seriously, you can't take evolution seriously. The second point is that the serpent, you can't just make that figurative. The serpent has to be literal because there was a literal punishment in the story for all serpents. So this serpent wasn't punished per se. All serpents were punished. And what was their punishment? That they were to crawl on their bellies. But we know that serpents have been crawling on their bellies for 100 million years. So that's not possible. So you might say that the world is 100 million years old and snakes were around for 100 million years, but you would also have to say that humans have only been around for 200,000 years. So it just doesn't work even as an old Earth creationist. 3, the garden has to be taken literally because at the end of the story, I just want to read this passage, verse 23 and 24 of chapter 3 of Genesis. So the Lord God expelled him, talking about Adam, from the orchard in Eden to cultivate the ground from which he had been taken. When he drove the man out, he placed on the eastern side of the orchard in Eden angelic sentries who used the flame of a whirling sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, you can say this is all allegorical, but we have a location of the garden. We have the specific entrance that was being guarded, and we have an angel with a particularly magical weapon for the purpose of keeping humans away from it. It's a lot of verisimilitude in this piece of literature to then just turn around and say, well, it was just allegorical. So I think that the storyteller wants you to think that this was a real event. And that doesn't work with evolution, old or young, because there is no such garden, no such tree, no such century, no such sword. And I don't. So I think that presents a problem that someone trying to defend the fall is going to have a hard time overcoming. My next point is that humans didn't bring sin into the world. So this is, I don't think I actually have to make this point or any other point, because I think the fall has already fallen in my previous two arguments. But just to keep it going, part of the reason we have the fall is an explanation of how sin came into the world. But we already had sin before humans, and this is a part where the story just conflicts with itself. Because in the Bible, we're given to believe that there was sin in heaven well before the foundations of the earth. So humans didn't invent sin. Sin was already around. And then there was an evil being in the garden before humans were formed. So even on earth, humans didn't introduce sin in the world. There was already sin in a being that was sentient, sinning before Eve took a bite of the fruit, because you could say that his first sin was to lie and to deceive Eve. So there was already sin in the world. And finally, on this point, nature was already red in tooth and claw before humans. And so if you listen to many of the new apologists, they would say, well, we already had predation and animal and plant death before the fall. So humans didn't introduce sin into the world, and they didn't introduce death into the world. The world, as far as we can tell, was already fallen before the fall took place. And so theologically, it just doesn't make any sense. And finally, the impossible human. So Dale had some a little bit of fun at my expense in the article. I suggest that you read what Dale said there. I don't even want to contradict him so much, because I think his point was already lost before we got there. But I would say that in order to get to what a Christian might think of as the perfect human, the ideal human, it requires evolution. You have to have evolution to get to that human. So if you want to look at the first humans produced by evolution, they couldn't be the type of person that Christians are talking about, or else we couldn't have gotten to this point. I think that type of person would have simply died out. And so the only way that you can say we were ever in some kind of perfected state is, in fact, to claim a special creation of humans where they were made from a different substance, given a different spirit, and made, wholly complete from the beginning, and take them completely out of the evolutionary story. And so now again, you have to decide, well, are you defending the evolutionary story, or are you defending the young earth creation story? But you can't have both. So if you say that we were in a perfected state, then you're really defending a young earth creationist position. And you're saying we have to evolve to that state, then you are repudiating the Genesis story and saying, yeah, we've got to have evolution. Either way, you can't have a fall as it is demonstrated in the Bible, and you can't have Christianity without a fall as demonstrated in the Bible. And so this is my entire case. I turn it over to the prosecution.
Okay. So yeah, I think in terms of my own stance, I largely agree with David this week because I do lean towards a young Earth creationist interpretation if the Bible is inerrant, and if evolution is true, I do see these as being incompatible with just a straightforward literalistic reading of Genesis. I don't see how one could reconcile that unless you admit, okay, well there are some errors or there's some symbolic parts to the story that aren't meant to be taken literal. Now, in terms of the Christian who takes a evolutionary creationist or a theistic evolutionist perspective, what could be said, and David's already, he knows in advance. What I was going to argue is that I don't think things like original sin or a literal Adam and Eve are necessary, or that they're essential to the to the essential Christian doctrines. And the reason I say this, first of all, with original sin, that this has there are various Christians that don't agree with this doctrine. The Eastern Orthodox, for example, don't accept it. And even if you want to say, well, there are the Bible takes these verses as literal. If a old Earth creationist or an evolutionary creationist says, okay, but there's errors in the Bible in these verses, then I think that you can still reconcile a straightforward reading of evolutionary history, and then say, okay, but this aspect or that isn't meant to be taken literally. What's essential to the Christian is that we have a sinful nature, that we sin. It doesn't have to be inherited. We don't have to be culpable for Adam's specific sin, which is the doctrine of original sin. It's not just that we inherit some sinful inclination, even. It's that we're actually guilty for what Adam did. I don't see these as essential, even if the Bible, as I think the Bible teaches them. A Christian could say, well, you know what? Romans 5 is in error. That stuff is not true, and still be a Christian. Now, again, I want to be clear. I think that's wrong. I do think that that we should look at these Bible verses, and I personally do believe in the doctrine of original sin as the biblical position. So I think that takes care of the essential doctrine and the fact. Now, in terms of it being incompatible, I do think that if there was a literal Adam and Eve, they would need to be a special creation. It wouldn't just be that they evolved. I think that God, at a minimum, would have created them as a living soul. And in terms of the serpent, so this was something that David, I think this was his best point that I sort of struggled with trying to. So basically, he says that according to evolution, serpents have been around as belly crawlers for 95 million to 100 million years. So even taking an old Earth understanding, humans have been around for at most 200,000 years. This contradicts, because the punishment of the snake was to undergo this physical change, which we know existed millions of years prior to, this special creation, Adam and Eve, ever showing up on Earth. So the way I interpret this, I think that this is actually a symbolic aspect. I don't think that, unless you're taking a young Earth creationist perspective, I don't think the snake can be taken literally. You got to say it's an error or symbolic in some way. And we do know that in the ancient Eastern culture, at the time that the texts were being written, snakes were at one time seen in a positive light. However, that began to change around the time that people could say that Genesis was written on a skeptical perspective, if you're not accepting Moses' authorship or that sort of thing. You could say, okay, well, the snake is symbolic. It represents Satan was the one who tempted Adam and Eve, and at that point, the author used the image of the snake to represent that evil, because they had that negative perception in the culture at the time. And the garden has to be literal because God placed a guard from keeping people getting to the tree of life. Again, I just don't see his point that this whole thing could be symbolic. Like the tree of life, I don't, unless you're taking a young earth creationist, inerrantist perspective, I think it's possible that a Christian could say this is a symbolic element representing that because of this sin that people were separated from the source of life, separated from God. I see that as a way that evolutionary creationists could use to interpret the Bible, and including that aspect there. Now, okay, so humans didn't bring sin into the world. Now, here's another point. Let's pretend there is no Adam and Eve. We just evolved and we're getting better and that sort of thing. One could just transpose the original sin doctrine to Satan. He's trying to say that, well, sin came into the world with Lucifer. Again, if you're not taking it from a straightforward literalistic perspective, if you're not constrained by that, it's possible that you could just say, okay, well, all of this sin goes back to Lucifer's action or Lucifer's sinful behavior. Now, again, I want to be clear, that's not what I personally believe. I do believe in a literal Adam and Eve. I do believe in original sin, and I do believe in a literal fall. I'm not as precise on the detail. I'm not, persuaded about the literal snake or tree of knowledge of evil and that sort of thing necessarily, but nature's okay. So yeah, I think that's a possibility that we need to be mindful of. Now, the impossible human, aspect. So I thought, so you recognize here that it is possible that a human being can have these various properties that you write about in your blog, such as not being privy to harm, some of the other attributes. And it's not that you're saying these are impossible for humans to achieve. It's just that evolutionary processes alone, without God's involvement in creating the first humans, wouldn't be able to get that, because it's a constantly upward moving process from bad getting increasingly better and better or something. One aspect that you might not consider, with God's involvement, it is possible that there could be ups and downs. We could have been put into a perfected state in an isolated area, like God separates a couple of hominids, gives them souls in a Garden of Eden. Let's take all of that literally, and then as a result of their sin, again, they fell back in and were forced back into the evolutionary process, of which they're getting more perfect, getting to the point where at the second coming of Jesus they'll be perfected in a perfect state again. I think I've covered all your points there.
Okay, so you ready for a little bit of back and forth?
Sure.
Okay, let's start at the last point. I would say that you can't actually point to a perfected human from the past. So you say, well, maybe we started perfect and then we went down and then we're coming back up, and, kind of a yo-yo. I just don't think that makes a lot of theological sense. So heaven, do you believe that humans will be perfect in heaven?
Yes.
Okay, and do you believe that humans will sin in heaven?
No.
Okay, so then you believe that a perfected human is a human that won't sin. So if that's the case, then the Adam and Eve in the garden were not perfected humans, because they clearly had the proclivity to sin, and they did so. So I would say that whatever we got from Adam and Eve in the garden, it wasn't some idyllically perfect human. It was a fallen human from the get-go.
So it depends then. So Adam and Eve were in what theologians call a state of integrity. Yes, they had the ability to sin. So I can answer in terms of the future end state of heaven, I could answer it this way. Number one, maybe the people in heaven they do have the ability to sin. It's just they will never exercise it. And, God in his foreknowledge tells us that. However, even if it's not the case that we're able to sin in heaven, the perfected state in the beginning, it was perfect for us to have the ability to sin at that time. Then we go through the process of the sin curse, and that brings us to a point where our character would have achieved what God had in mind. So if it were the case that Adam and Eve didn't eat the apple, then they would be in the heaven or end time state. They would be transformed or something. You could say something like that. They would be able to have additional properties of walking through walls like Jesus in his resurrected body or something like that. But because they chose to sin, okay, now we go through this protracted process. So Jesus has to die for our sins in order to get us where we could have been had Adam and Eve.
You think that Adam and Eve could have not sinned?
As a counterfactual, yes.
Theologically, do you think Adam and Eve could have not sinned? Do you think that that any human put in that garden could have not sinned? Because here's the thing: if you think that some other human could have done better, then God did us wrong by putting in those humans when He could have put in the ones that wouldn't sin. If you think that Adam and Eve could have not sinned, then I don't know that makes sense of the idea that God created a plan of salvation before the first humans existed. He created a situation where He knew we would sin. So I don't know that makes sense of the idea that Adam and Eve could have not sinned. They were sinners from the start.
So put it this way: they could have not sinned, but God knew they would not sin.
Okay, but if God knew that
and
all
same
humans,
for any human that would have,
just follow my logic.
Any other human.
If God knew all humans, no matter which humans He put in, would choose to sin, that is indistinguishable from saying that all humans had to sin.
No, it's distinguishable, right?
Not really, because any human would have
they
sinned.
They had a free will choice. They could have refrained from sinning, but their free will choice was not to do that.
Right, but follow the logic. If you plug in another set of humans, would they have done the same thing? Plug in another set of humans, do it infinitely. So you're saying all humans would have sinned.
Yes.
So that to me is indistinguishable from sin being inevitable. We were created to do exactly what we did.
Yeah, so at that level, it was inevitable. God knew before the creation of the world, from the foundation of the world, that this was going to come about.
Which means that there is nothing perfect about the state of humans when we were made from God.
No, we were perfect. Having the ability to sin, there's nothing imperfect about sin? Having the... Sorry?
Can God sin?
No, He can't.
Why not?
But here's the difference.
Okay.
Because, so he's a morally perfect being.
Okay.
A sinless being.
Good.
However, the laws of logic are what make it impossible for a morally perfect being to sin. The laws of logic do not dictate that I see where you're going to go with the perfected.
Yeah, because He made us. We're the apple that didn't fall far from the tree. So why aren't we morally perfect? If you're considering that aspect of God as a part of perfection, why isn't that a part of the perfected human?
Well, see, because I'm using your terminology or whatever. Forget perfected. Then they were sinless humans.
Mm-hmm. But they were gonna sin.
They were in a sinless state, a state of integrity.
Sure. Because they were brand new. Like a baby, newborn, is in a state of integrity, but all he has to do is grow up a little bit and he's going to poop his diapers. That's inevitable because that's how we are. So you can't actually say, well, the baby's a perfect human being because he hasn't done anything wrong. No, he's a human being. He's going to be human. If he lives, he's going to be human. So that's what he is. He is what he is going to be. And I don't think the Christian gets to say, well, humans were perfect when they were brand new babies, and then they made themselves imperfect by growing up.
That makes perfect sense. Their decision was not determined by any factors outside of their own free choice. That's not. You're not like. Yeah, you're in a sinless state. You're in that state of integrity until you know what? I'm going to sin. I'm going to make the choice to sin. It doesn't matter from God's eye view that God knew this was going to take place. For that's not God. God didn't cause them to sin. That's where the problem would come in. If you're going to say like they were fated to do it or something like that.
Well, yeah, they were, because they were not given the state of moral perfection where they couldn't sin. Once again, it's like saying that a newborn baby has never pooped his diaper until he does. But if he lives, he's going to. It is inevitable. It is what he does. It is what he does by nature. And
okay, so then no, that's not what.
But by nature, you can say that the humans were perfect when they just crawled out of the dirt. But if you're telling me that every human would have done what the first humans did, then we're talking about something that is endemic to humans. It is by nature that we do this.
It's not by nature. We had a free choice. Right, we're not I'm not a compatibilist. We're not determined to make a certain choice. That's the only way that what you're trying to say works. Now, as a Molinist, yes, God knew what our free will choices were going to be, and He chose to create the world in which we make those choices.
Could God not have given us a type of moral spirit, like His, where we could not sin, where it would have been logically impossible for us to sin? If it's logically impossible for God to sin, could God have not made us so that it was logically impossible for us to sin?
Sorry, no, I don't think so. There's no logically possible world in which free creatures exist.
God's a free creature. Stop it. God's a free creature. You've already given me a God who's a free creature.
God's a free creature. No, He's not. He's not a creature.
Is He free?
He's the creator. He's free.
Okay.
Well, He's not morally free.
Okay, so he's
morally
though,
determined.
But He's perfect.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing imperfect about being not morally determined. So my question still pertains. He could have made us to be morally determined as well, and we would have also been perfect. You can't say it's perfect for God, but it wouldn't be perfect for us.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. That's interesting. Okay, so God is determined by His own by His own nature. It's His free choice. He is morally perfect, and then the laws of logic take over after that, based on His nature. So it's His nature to always be good.
Right, and we are we're His progeny.
So sorry.
We're His progeny. So
Yeah.
how did we end up with a different nature?
Because I don't think it's logically. God could have created a bunch of robots who never sinned.
But He didn't.
But they wouldn't be considered free.
Kids. He created us after His own image. So you can't say, well, He just created sand puppets. He had babies.
Yeah.
Okay, so
but
how
it's
do
just
we?
there's no
how do we have a
spirit
different
that
nature?
would be. Because once we're free, it's just the case that we choose not to to refrain from sinning. We just choose to sin in every logical possible world with free creatures in it. that's the choice
But
that
God's
they make.
not free in that way. He doesn't have to have the libertarian free will to sin. And I keep trying to get you back to this place. Whatever God's nature is that keeps him from being able to sin should be our nature too.
Yeah. So this is a really good point, actually. So I'm questioning, because I was always saying God's morally determined by the laws of logic based on his morally perfect nature. But you're trying to say, well, God could create a world of robots.
Not robots.
And
I'm
that's
trying to
good.
say that
No.
God shouldn't
Well,
be able
if
to
God-
create anything other than people like himself. Because
Yeah,
if
but
we're his children...
That's robots. God.
No,
I'm
it's
saying-
children. It's children. Your kids aren't robots. My kids aren't robots. They're genetic clones of me. That's exactly what they are. God should have produced genetic clones of himself, spiritual clones of himself. Now, I can make a robot, but that's not my that's not my kid. It's not made in my image. God didn't make robots. He had babies.
Yeah, there's no difference though. It's robot. It's still the when I say robots, I'm saying he's morally determined.
Which should be his genetic nature. We should be genetic clones of God in that sense.
Let's put it this way then. There's counterfactuals where God could have, like I can avoid. Okay, yeah, there's counterfactuals. God could have sinned, but the reason he can't is because his nature. He doesn't make that free choice. That by his morally perfect nature, then the laws of logic come in to make sure that it's not. There's no logical possible world in which God actualizes a counterfactual
Just
or
in
something.
the formation
That's
of that sentence, God could have sinned, but the reason he can't. That's, we can stop there. And look,
No,
I think
that makes sense.
I think we've given.
It makes sense, though.
I think we've both given the listeners something to think about there. I do want to touch on some of the other points.
I want to say that is an interesting point, because I remember talking about that when I first started on the blogs, and my way of making sense. Okay, well, God's morally determined, but we're not, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
But
I've never been able to understand the "but we're not" part. Because whatever God is what I assume we would be in heaven, and what he could have made us on earth. And in fact, I can't understand how a God who... See, here's the thing. So we have sin, because it's one of the choices we can make. But we're told that it's not one of the choices God can make. So what I'm trying to figure out is how God can even possibly make a being that could possibly sin. Because it's not in his repertoire. He has to intentionally create something that's not anything like him, that can do this thing that he can't do. And one would wonder why he would even want to do that.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of why he creates that's I've already spoken about that.
I'm not trying to get in there. I'm just trying to explain why this is a stumbling block to me.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just okay. Maybe I need to rethink that about saying God is morally determined. Maybe he is free, just like we are, and it just so happens to be the case because he's so good, he never chooses the sin option.
Skeptics
so
and
in that
Seekers,
case, we are just like him.
Skepticsandseekers.wordpress.com. Skepticsandseekers.wordpress.com. Leave your comments. Use feedback. We want to hear from you, because this is important. So working backward here, we still got a few minutes. So there was sin in heaven before the foundations of the earth. Now the fall implies that the universe was introduced to sin for the first time because of what humans did. You can't dismiss this by saying, well, okay, maybe it's because of what Satan did. Well, then that's not the fall anymore. So I will agree with you that your speculation could be possible. Maybe it goes to Satan. But then everything that Paul said in Romans was wrong, because he said, what did we count? 5 or 6 times in a row. It's Adam, it's Adam, it's Adam, it's Adam. And if it's Satan, then we got a different story.
If if it's Satan, okay, so you're addressing
I'm
whether or not it's possible that there's not a literal Adam and Eve, or are you talking about the serpent?
that Adam and Eve didn't bring sin into the world. That's so I'm just going backward in the points and addressing your rebuttals.
Okay.
You're saying that maybe Adam didn't bring the first sin. Maybe Satan could have brought the first sin, and the story would still be intact. No, the story would not be intact if the first sin is tracked back to Satan. We've got a very different story at that point, and you can't. So I will agree with you simply because agreeing with you torpedoes your position. Not because I actually believe it. But yeah, so if you want to say, well, no, actually the first sin doesn't track back to Adam, it tracks back to Satan, then we're done. We have a completely different story, and the Bible is wrong about that.
Yeah, you would have to admit that there are errors. Paul was mistaken in his belief that there was a literal Adam and Eve that it all goes back to. However, I can't let you get away with that even by itself either. So it may be cruel to continue to twist this knife, but Adam is inexorably tied to Jesus. You can't untie Jesus from Adam and tie him to Satan. So you can't retell the story and say, well, because then Satan is the federal head of humans. No, he's not, because he's not a human. You can't say, well, the perfect sacrifice of Jesus undoes the sin of Adam, and take Adam out of it and put someone else there. Okay, I was just about to say something, but then I was going to say we're all sentient beings. He could be the federal head of sentient beings or something.
But he's not.
We're not. Sorry?
But he's not. Satan is not Satan is not the federal head of sentient beings.
If we're saying that there's errors in the Bible, this is for the creationary evolutionists who can admit, Paul was mistaken and stuff, then I could say he's the federal head of sentient beings.
He's mistaken about his entire formulation of redemption, because it's tied to his formulation of redemption. So you can't say, well, he's wrong about that, but he's right about the Jesus part.
That's possible. That was within recent memory. But I'll tell you what point, before we get distracted, that I like, that's making me think again, is, Jesus came to us in the form of a human, and that was significant as opposed to like being just a sentient being that got killed or that experienced death for our sins. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to think, can a old earth creationist say, well, yeah, but even the mode doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he came as a human. I guess that's possible. Like, if once we're admitting errors, someone could say, well, the gist is, look, all sentient beings are sinners. They share in this original sin of Lucifer. In order to rectify that, God came to earth in the form of a human being and provided atonement for all sentient beings or something. That would still preserve the essential core of what the Christian gospel message is. And again, I want to be clear, this isn't what I believe, okay? I do believe in the literal Adam and Eve. I'm very much on David's side, that I think these suggestions, they're ad hoc, they're not very probable options. I think that the Bible makes it clear that there was an Adam and Eve. This is very, very important doctrine, that there was original sin. Creation was cursed through Adam's sin, not Lucifer's sin. So please understand, I'm somewhat arguing against myself in order to see if it's possible, if it's possible to preserve Christianity without these things as a worst case scenario. And I think that could be one way of doing that. What would you make about the sentient thing? And then he comes as a sentient being in the form of humanity for whatever reason. That illustrates it to us and saves more humans that way or something.
Yeah, it's not a story that I can interact with, honestly, because if you're saying, the doctrine of original sin can be altered in some way, then it's just not the doctrine of original sin anymore. The doctrine of original sin has some necessary components to it, and a necessary component is Adam and Eve, first humans. They bring sin into the world. All of the world, whether you sin the way Adam did or not, you're still covered by sin because of what Adam did. Not what Steve did, not what Eve did, not what Jack did, not what Satan did. It's all about Adam. And so if that is not true, then sin did not come into the world in that way. The best you can say about sin is that it's just a thing that we do individually.
Yeah,
But you cannot say that there is some corporate sin that we're under. And I think that when you take that away, you have undermined a major doctrine of Christianity. I don't think that I have to destroy it more than that. So if you take away Adam from this, you don't have a corporate sin, and therefore you don't have a corporate salvation.
Yeah, so it's a major doctrine, as you say, and it what I'm suggesting contradicts what I think is the clear teaching of Scripture. But I'm saying that the evolutionary creationist just says, so what? I don't care. Throw it out. What is essential is what the Bible claims is essential for salvation. We can still have salvation story, even if you're, like Pelagianism is a heresy. It's unbiblical. It's wrong. But they don't believe in original. He doesn't believe in original sin, in the sense that, okay, all humans are culpable. They don't care about your Romans 5. They can just say, number one, they can debate, well, does Romans 5 actually teach what you're saying, which I think it does. But they can just, even if you win that, they just say, I don't care. It's an error that's wrong. The essential gist is that every sentient being is a sinner.
I don't care about Pelagianists. So that's.
But wouldn't it?
No, because honestly, if all you have left of Christianity is, Pelagianism, I think I would retire from this field because Christianity would pretty much be dead. So I don't think that you want a world where the Pelagianists win.
Okay, so how do you determine how? This isn't what I believe, of course. I think that we need to take these major doctrines seriously in Scripture. I'm adopting a worst case scenario because I think that it is still possible, but I want to. You're arguing that it's an essential doctrine. How do you define Christianity? I'm curious. Is it just, okay, everything the Bible says has to be inerrant, perfect? If even one thing is taken out, it's all wrong? Are there any room for any errors? Are there anything that...
When I was a Christian, I was an inerrantist. So I'm not just arguing a MacGuffin here to try to win an argument. This is how I thought. This is what I believed. But
how do you determine that that's
because that's what I was
great?
taught.
I get that.
I don't know that I can determine it better than that. I was taught that way. It made sense to me. There are many theological reasons that we've talked about off air. I don't think that it's necessary to go over that right now. We can have a broader discussion over that if you like. But however I got there, that's where I got. I am. Wearing my Christian hat, I'm an inerrantist. I'm also a young Earth creationist if I'm wearing my Christian hat, because I don't see any other way to read the Bible in a way that makes any sense.
Okay.
So.
And that is a topic. I just wanted to make sure we got that briefly in there.
But I'm a biblical literalist. Because I think that the writers of the literature wanted you to take it literally, at least some parts of it. So your question is, well, how do I determine what's important to the Christian faith? If some part of the Christian faith, if we say it's like a building, and some part of it is on the second floor, you can't take the first floor out from under it and still say, well, that's okay, the second floor is still pretty nice, I think I'll just stay here. The fall is the first floor. It's the foundation. You don't get to stay in the building and say, well, okay, get rid of the foundation. We don't need it. So when it's an argument like that, that's, that's why I call it a foundational argument. You can't put the second story on top of it unless that is solid. And I think one of the things that you're arguing is that the thing that's built on top of original sin is original redemption. But there is no original redemption without original sin. You can't live in the second floor without a foundation.
But there could be redemption. That's what I'm saying, is the foundational first floor could be that all humans are sinners. Not original sin.
Right. But you're just trying to build a different floor, and that's a different building entirely.
So I'm trying to
you're
determine
asking me,
why.
can you make a religion that would make sense out of some of the Christian elements? Yes, you can. But that's not the religion that we're debating. We're debating the one that you can read about in the Bible. That's the only one I actually care about. So if you are suggesting, well, there could be, if we rewrite the Bible a little bit, then we could make it where the religion makes sense. Great, rewrite the Bible. Let's talk about your religion. Everyone should keep a lookout for the Church of Dale, churchofdale.com. But, if what we're looking at is the Church of Christ by Jesus, inspired by the Holy Spirit, then we have to deal with those elements as they're given. And if those elements are wrong, that religion is wrong.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's a debate over which building is Christianity. And okay, cool. So I understand how you get there. You just take the Bible as a whole, as given. I'm going to be making a similar argument next week. So
yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I got you on the record. So, but yeah.
So before talking about next week's podcast, I want to say a good discussion, Dale. I appreciate that. I want to pick up some user feedback, and again, thank you so much for everyone who goes to skepticsandseekers.wordpress.com and clicks on the feedback tab and leaves feedback or leaves a comment at the end of the blogs, or it goes to skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Those are the ways to get in touch. I want to pick up on Mage1999, who gave us a like. We get a lot of likes and follows, and I just thought I'd mention some of those likes and follows. Mage1999 also has a blog from Mage Mind, is the name of his blog. Hayden Clark gave us a like, and I do not know if he has a blog. So I am clicking on a link to see. Sorry, so I think he does have a blog. It's called Help Me Believe.
Okay, that's his. Yeah.
And so, thank you to Hayden. For that. Also, Anazi 2050 gave us a like, and all of these people that I've mentioned have also followed the blog. You can click follow on our blog, and you will get notifications of every new post that we make, so you don't have to go rushing to the blog on Sunday morning to see if something new is there. It will show up for you every time. You can also subscribe to us in your favorite feed reader of choice. That's how I read our blog a second time. It comes in my news feed reader. And with that, I want to read out a couple of comments. Let's do Brian first.
Okay.
In fact, would you like to read that one?
Sure. So Brian says, hey guys, loving the podcast and blog. Having been a longtime lurker on the unbelievable message boards, David, your posts are a weekly must-read for me. Thanks for all you do. And Dale, thanks for engaging with David so this great new forum can be made. My suggestion is have a podcast on planting as warrant. Dale seems to use this as a go-to move, but even Plantinga himself says it's only of use to the individual and his personal belief. It's of no use for convincing others whatsoever. So it seems an odd tool to use so frequently in a skeptic versus believer debate context. Keep up the good work. I think that's a fair enough point. I think that in fairness, both David and I did make that distinction. Like when I was answering the podcast, what I think is the best argument or evidence that allows me to know that Christianity is true. Yeah, properly basic beliefs work on an individual level. There's a difference between knowing and showing. I can't show you guys that what I'm saying is true, that I have this irresistible inclination caused by my set of cognitive or spiritual faculties being activated through the witness of the Holy Spirit. This is solely, I put it forward to you guys, and evaluate yourself if you have this or not. I can tell you all day long that, yeah, I'm pretty certain I've got the Holy Spirit. I'm not 100% certain I have knowledge, but yeah, I'm pretty convinced I've got knowledge, and it's enough for me to base my faith, at least in part, on this reason. But yeah, it's subjective, right? It's not analyzable by you. I have no idea what's in your head. If you have any properly basic beliefs, I hope that you would believe in the law of non-contradiction, not just as a brute fact, but if you would claim to have any knowledge claims, then yeah, you can't show anyone that.
So, Brian, I agree with Dale here, and I think that we have discussed Plantinga's warrant pretty well in episode 3, which is part 2 of that longer discussion. So I don't know what else we could say about it, but I do like your suggestion. Let me just amend it a little bit. I think that we should have a show on hard evidences, though, for either side. So rather than talk about philosophical evidences, we should talk about hard evidences, because Dale is an evidentialist. He believes that there's hard evidence for many of the Christian claims. I believe that there is not hard evidence, or at least what things are presented as evidence aren't very good. And so I think it is a fair question to say, well, what evidence would you use to convince someone else? And so I do think that we should focus on that. And if I wanted to take a hardline view that there is no God, not necessarily the view that I take when I'm on the show, that happens to be my personal view, what hard evidences can I show for that would be convincing to someone else? And so I think that's a show topic worth exploring. So we want to thank you, Brian, for your suggestion. And I want to close with Limey, who has been in spirited debate with Dale on the blogs. You can read the blog posts and interact on the blogs in the comment sections there. Limey has said to Dale on the subject of this fireman analogy, which is still burning, I disagree. God created the people knowing their limits and abilities. He also specified what the crime was, knowing his creation couldn't avoid failing. He then became He then, because he's such a loving dude, created the worst possible punishment he could, knowing that he'd be condemned, knowing that he'd be condemning all of his creation to that fate. So, this is a comment on the evil God conundrum, and once again, they were kind of hashing it out over the God as a fireman analogy, and that rages on. Dale, did you want to comment to that in print? I mean, on the podcast as you have in print.
I'm just scrolling, trying to find it. It's under the evil God dilemma, I think. God is a
Well, I mean,
So if
you
you-
could just shortcut it
Hang on.
and just say he's right and you're wrong
So-
and be done with it.
So I think this was my response to it. So I was just saying, so God didn't set the fire; humans did with their free will choice at the fall. So people are the ones that put themselves in danger, not God. If you're getting into the whole. Oh, okay. If you're getting into the issue, well, God shouldn't have created people capable of setting the fire in the first place. Then you can refer to my Molinistic answer as to this being one of the two best possible worlds.
Sure, and
yeah.
then you can refer to my comments on this show for that. And so if you want to jump into the fireman analogy before the embers burn out, feel free to continue that comment under the evil God, or you can follow it on this show since we brought it up here as well. Next week, we will be taking on part 2 of subsumability. And this is where I think Dale was really angling to go with the first part anyway. So we will be talking about... Dale, tell them what we'll be talking about.
Yeah, so basically it's going to be what David wanted to talk about last week when we were discussing subsumability. It's going to be the issue of sufficient attachment. What is Christianity proper? Does a miracle like the resurrection attest to the truth of Christianity? How does the Bible factor in to that? Is the Bible sufficiently attached? As we know, David thinks it is because that's what he was taught. So I don't know if he'll be disagreeing with me too much. So.
I assure you, I'll be disagreeing with him every step of the way, because one of the arguments for sufficient attachment is that we can believe the whole of the story because of certain important parts of the story. So Dale will be making that case. I'll be making the case for why that is absolutely not true. It'll be a very Bible-centric discussion. After that, I want to let you know, I'll give you a glimpse into 2 weeks ahead. We will have a very special guest on the show. Randall Rouser will be joining me, and we will be talking about the subject of... I forgot what we're going to be talking about. That's embarrassing.
I get a week off. I like it.
Yeah, no, we'll be talking...
I'll let the... Go ahead.
No.
You'll be talking about what?
I've forgotten. I'm an old man. We will be talking about the subject of progressive revelation. And so that's going to be a very lively discussion. We've already written our articles, and so I think that you're going to enjoy that. That's going to come after sufficient attachment. It's also going to come after the week that Randall and I appear on the Unbelievable broadcast. So if you are familiar with Unbelievable, I will be a guest on Unbelievable on the weekend of the 24th, 25th, so whenever that show airs for you. Randall and I will be on there, as well as Andrew Knight and Justin will be debating our book, Still Unbelievable, which was a response book to his book, Unbelievable. And the week after that, Skeptics and Seekers will have Randall on for what will kind of be a round 2, if you will. So stay tuned. A lot of exciting things.
And just before we go, one last quick, because I am interested in a point that David made early on in the show about if it's a perfection for God to be morally determined, why didn't he just create human beings that are morally determined? So I don't know if there's any Christians that do tune in. I know Joyce got in touch early on, but if there's anyone, even if you're skeptical, anyone who has any thoughts on that, I would be interested in learning more, because I think that's a point that's going to have me thinking about it after the show's done. So,
and believe it or not, I actually would love comments on that too, not just to say, yeah, right on, you got him, but I would be curious to what the rebuttals are to that argument too, because this is one of those discussions that we had in the moment. We didn't really plan for it, and so we both will go back and listen to this and probably say, did I say that? So I would be I would be interested in knowing what the rebuttal to that was, because these are things that we have not talked about in the past. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next week and the week after that. Randall Rouser, and who knows what happens after that. Thanks.
All right, have a good week. Bye.
Bye.